was the person that Proctor was willing to help, since Proctor is the one who was picked to replace Martin King, but Jesse is the one he trained. If you had spent all this time on putting him in place, and you ain't got nobody else around Martin. Now, Andy was supposed to be shot with Martin, but Andy wasn't on the balcony. He was on the floor, so he didn't get it. Ralph was inside, so he didn't get it. Key point, if you spend all that time, and Martin's about to say you are an agent, do you understand that you got to press go on the assassination? Because now Martin is so continuously condemning you, you got wiretaps everywhere. And we know what he said about Jesse in front of everybody, but who knows what he said when it was just him and Ralph? How much more severe was his accusations? Such that if you didn't kill Martin, of white limitations don't run out on murder. Okay. Let's let this run, and then we're going to go back and look at it again in straight speed. Look at.
He won a few times.
Right, look at Jesse. Martin still won't acknowledge him.
Usually when he finished his speech, he was covered.
Yes, go back. Now I ask you, when you look at it, is that Jesus or Judas? Jesus or Judas?
Times, and I saw him visibly shaking himself.
Nobody would touch him.
He was caught up in it. But
yes, let it run, let it run.
Caught up as he was that night.
Now we're on the day of.
How he spent the day.
Now Jesse done went and told them, look, you better move now.
Reteaching not violence.
I'm running out of time. This is the Last Supper.
Making sure that everybody was focused. I spent the day in court and convinced the judge that we could put together a nonviolent demonstration. When I came back to the motel, he said, "Where have you been? I've been looking for you all day long." And he picked up the pillow off the bed and he threw it at me. I was trying to explain to him that I'd been in court, and he said, "Don't you know you're supposed to call me? You need to let me know what's going on." I said, "Look, I was on the stand most of the day." And he was just feeling good. And every time I'd offer an excuse, he'd pick up another pillow and throw it at me. So after a little while, I just started taking them back. And everybody sort of picked up pillows, and we had just a very childish pillow fight. And then the master, but he always liked to eat catfish at the Lorraine Hotel. And Miss Lady said about the platter. And Dr. Abernathy was upset because she only had one platter. And the king said, "Hush, and put the plate in the bed and said, "Everybody, get something off of this plate to eat."
See these men break up trying to tell that story.
Dinner was to be served at my home at 6 o'clock. I went to the room.
They brought him on the balcony at 3:06.
I said, "Oh,
he was shot with a 30-06.
He said, "Oh, no, I called the house and dinner is not until 6, so we are in no hurry." I said, "Oh, my goodness." But by doing that, it gave me the wonderful privilege of spending the last hour of his life in room 306. He and Ralph Abernathy and myself. Then he and I went on the balcony. Ralph was still inside, and he was greeting people he had not seen.
I was in the parking lot, and we were suggesting that it was cool, and maybe he ought to go back and take a top coat with him, just in case.
I heard him above me.
It's my man Hosea.
And we had a limousine. I could touch the limousine. Had been loaned to us by one of the local fuel homes. And I heard a voice, the guy who was driving the limousine. He said, "Dr. King." Dr. King said, "Yes, Jones." He said, "Although the car is old, it's chilly. I recommend you get your coat." And the last word he said in this was, "Okay, Jones, get my coat." And I heard something say, "Pow!"
Stop. Oh, stop. Go back. Key point. Let's go back. There's the maid right there we were looking for. There's the cart. Oh. Okay, let's freeze it at the highest point where Jesse's back is in the pit. Right there, stop. There we go. There's Jesse Jackson. There's the maid. There's the cart. There's the white boy, Lau, L-A-U-E, head of the community strike, a member of the Community Relations Service of the Justice Department, which spies on racial tension. His boss was Roger Wilkins, the nephew of Roy Wilkins. There's Muriel McCullough, the FBI, CIA, Memphis Police Department informant, who now works for the CIA. There's Martin King laying there with the towel over his face. Brother, I appreciate this pointer. This really helped out a lot. There's Ralph. There's Andy. Now, why is Jesse running up this way when everybody else came up that stairway and went that way? Because he had to make sure that room 316 and 317 didn't have no remnant of invader running out of it. Remember, he had just, see, that could have been the invaders running down that ramp right there. And when those people start that phony pointing, maybe the invaders might have went, no, down there. You understand? Because the invaders had what? Okay. Now, there's the maid. There's the cart. You see that cart? There are the wheels. You understand? At 6 o'clock, you ain't changing no beds and no motel? Check. Okay, let's let it run. There's a good shot of McCullough. There's Martin with the towel over his face. There's Martin again.
I looked up and didn't see him on the balcony, except that I saw his shoes sticking out the end of the balcony. All of the police, instead of going to where the shot came from, they were all coming to see what happened. So the picture on the balcony was us trying to say it came from over there.
Stop. There we go. That's good. There's that phony point. There's Jesse's head right there, making sure that he ran up there and gave a phony pointing. Now here's the problem with the people pointing. All of the people pointing were this way, looking up to Martin. The shots came from behind them, whether from the bushes or from the rooming house. It was behind them. Not one single person said they turned around and saw somebody or at the rooming house. Those that even saw anybody, Solomon Jones, Earl Caldwell, New York, saw somebody moving in the bushes. Check. So how is it that those with their back turns suddenly become so definitive on something they didn't even see? You understand? It's not logical that they're primary sources for a focus. Okay, we can turn the lights down. It was a script, right. So, and Andy's recanted his false pointing.
And covered him from his neck down. Someone had a towel put to it. Blood was just everywhere.
I went out in that yard and I started walking. And all...
Now listen how mad he was.
All the hatred in my life, which was a lot of hatred, came up in me. I went to reach into the air and take molecules, protons, electrons, and make me a gun and kill me some white people. Because I thought those white
That's my man.
Kill him. They came running close there. And I just, oh, God is going to kill. I want to kill, I'd have died to kill. And I started thinking, you promised him that you would not do it.
Okay, now watch this. After so much pressure being put on Jesse Jackson, Tim Russell of Meet the Press puts Jesse on April 5th, 1998, and takes him right back to that moment we just looked at. And who did Martin say speak for him that night? Who? Okay, listen to this. Turn it up.
But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life, longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain.
Jesse hollering, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm not fearing.
The loudest affirmator, you know.
My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Now,
And as he concluded his speech, he walked behind, and there, as you see,
stop.
on the shoulders.
Now, what's happening? NBC, Meet the Press, the most watched Sunday news program, goes back to this moment that we're out teaching is a point of distrust and evidence of Martin's dislike to Jesse. They go right back to that spot, put him right on Rockefeller's NBC, toss that ball right up and say, Jesse, now when I toss this ball up, I want you to stuff it home. So he puts a circle around Jesse's head and a circle around Martin's head, calls it close, and says, you were one of Martin's closest associates. What did Martin King say to you the night before he died? What's up, Black?
Like I keep so. Lewis Jackson. What did you say to Dr. King at that moment? You recall?
Yeah, back it up and get that sound in there. And Jesse gets to holding his eyes all up funny like in the negotiator. He gets to...
So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
And as he concluded his speech, he walked behind, and there, as you see, tapped on the shoulders by one Jesse Lewis Jackson.
Highlights two faces and
At that moment, you recall?
wipes Ralph out.
It's difficult to express it because I think we were all crying. It's different in that the minister sitting at the right, Reverend Ben Hooks, Reverend Count Lovers, men were crying. It was kind of different. And like we realized he was under this burden, like he had released himself. So he tried not to come to the church to speak. He'd asked me to come to speak. I said, at the end of it, now go with me. So we went together.
Stop.
And the crowd.
What did he say? He said, as you know, it was men crying, Ben Hooks and Billy Kyles. And as you know, he asked me to make that speech that night. And I said I'd only make that speech if I can take Ralph with me. Now, here's the point. There would be no need to do no stupid stuff like that unless something else was going on that compelled the need to give him a chance to reconstruct history, to protect his face from the faceless people who got the facts. There would be no need to do this. It just wouldn't be a need. Okay, let's go back. Let's hear it one more time, and then we'll pull that one out.
And Dr. King came, so he got up there without notice and gave a very formal...
No, you got to go back a little
bit. Definitive.
And this is the book, The Bureau, that William Sullivan wrote, where he says this Proctor, not Pierce.
Because I think we were all crying. It was different in that the minister sitting at the right, Reverend Ben Hooks, Reverend Count Lovers, men were crying. It was kind of different. And like we realized he was under this burden, like he had released himself. So he tried not to come to church to speak. And he actually asked me to come to speak. I said, only Reverend Abernathy will go with me. And we went together. And the crowd cheered, and Ralph said, Jesse, this thing.
Oh, yeah, listen. No, let that go. He says, Ralph says, Jesse, this is Martin crowd.
The church, and called Bernard Lee and Dr. King.
And then he says, and I went and called Bernard Lee. Instead of saying, I said, Ralph, if you ain't going to make the speech, don't call Martin, I'll make the speech. He says, Ralph says, this ain't our crowd. And I said, let's call Martin.
That was just weeping and wailing. And yet, eerie at the end. He almost foreshadowed his own demise.
Okay, this is what you do. Put it on fast forward. Just let it run. Yeah, just let that run a second. And now this is a key point. How hard have they tried to maintain and protect one of the people that they know was in on the assassination? And in 1977, this is from the book called The Man to See. It's by Evan Thomas, and it's on Edward Bennett Williams, a white man who used to own the Baltimore Orioles. If you read that book by Spike Lee on the Malcolm X movie, Captain Joseph talks about Elijah Muhammad going to Benny Williams to try to get the men out of jail who were allegedly accused of shooting Malcolm X. So he was known as a real fix-it white man who could fix a case in a minute. Big time white boy. Also chaired the president's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. It's like the outside intelligence people on the inside of the government. Even at one point rumored to be deep throat. That's right, yeah, just let it run. That's Posner. Stop. Let's see if we stop that. Oh. Let's go back a little bit. Let's show the face of Gerald Posner, the little mop-headed white boy. Right there. Oh. Here we go. Turn on. Let's go a little slow. Not there. That's the Mason Temple. Stop him right there. That boy right there, Gerald Posner. He wrote this book right here, Killing the Dream. He wrote this book, Killing the Dream. And on the back of his book is that picture with Jesse, Martin, and Ralph, with Martin looking real puzzled. Can you see that? Okay. And in his book, Killing the Dream, he tries to help out Billy Kyles. Because in William Pepper's book, Orders to Kill, he says that Kyles is a Memphis Police Department informant. So Posner, he's going to defend Billy Kyles, and he puts this in his book. He says, Mike where? Said Jordan came to the lecture? He says here, Kyles told, in his book Orders to Kill, William Pepper raises the strong inference that Kyles might have been an FBI informant. It's degrading and insulting, quote, Kyles says, about the author Pepper's accusations. It casts an aspersion over my 40 years in the civil rights movement. I saw how Pepper operates. Now, he says that he's appalled that Pepper called him an FBI informant. Check. But what did I say Pepper called him?
An FBI informant?
No, I said that Pepper accused him in this book, Orders to Kill. See, you got to listen to them somatically. See, they're going to deny something, but they ain't going to deny what they were accused of. In Orders to Kill, this book, William Pepper says that Kyles, he talks to the police chief, Sam Evans, who was running things then. He said, Kyles was one of my informants. Billy Kyles was an informant. Billy Kyles is the one that told the police that Martin King don't need no protection that day. Okay? Billy Kyles is the one that made sure Martin King had his tie on. It was the briefing at 4:30 after Ray was checking in at 4 o'clock that said that friendlies will not be wearing ties, coding the people who were on the government side in the assassination scenario would not be wearing a tie. One guy that night was in an argument with Martin King because he was just insisting that he was not going to wear a tie to go to dinner. Who was that? Jesse Jackson. So much so that the argument is what held Martin King on the balcony so the shooting could go down after Kyles stepped away so they could get a better shot. Check. But my point here is that Posner defends Kyles as not being an FBI informant. The only problem was he was accused of being a Memphis Police Department informant. I mean, to me and you, an informant is an informant. But when you're somatically denying something, make sure it matches the accusation. Check. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Now, we just wanted to show Posner. Okay, you can let it fast forward. Okay, now, very important point. You can turn the lights up a second, because it'll take me a minute for that to get to the spot I need. In 1977, this is from that book, A Man to See, on Edward Bennett Williams. And this is Edward Bennett Williams says that Jesse Jackson came to see him because he thought he was in trouble with the U.S. government for misappropriating $1 million of the Push XL money. Page, for the record, page 464. When the establishment turned on Jackson, he came to Williams. In 1977, Senator Hubert Humphrey had seen a piece on 60 Minutes describing Jackson's attempts to motivate inner city youth to get an education. Humphrey urged HEW Secretary Joe Califano. Now that's important that he was head of HEW, now Department of Health and Human Services, because Joe Califano worked for the U.S. Army at the time Martin King was assassinated. So he was he was the legal advisor to the Secretary of the U.S. Army, and Secretary of the U.S. Army was Cyrus Vance. His military attaché was Al Haig, and his legal counsel was Joe Califano. Not one single book on any King assassination or Kennedy assassination appropriately brings up the role of Vance, Haig, and Califano. So now Califano is on the inside, having been an assassin. Now he's going to help Jesse Jackson, having been an assassin. And Jesse Jackson goes to Califano. It says, Jackson gratefully asked Califano for $25,000 grant. Califano told him he needed, quote, $1 million. Now, how many white people you ever met? You asked them for a quarter and they gave you $100. You ever met a white person do that? So it's strange. Jesse would walk into the government, ask for a $25,000 grant. Califano told him he needed $1 million and then proceeded to give the black leader $6 million. Of the $6 million, he misappropriated $1 million. Now the feds got him for misappropriation of funds. He's $1 million missing. Reagan becomes the president. Jesse gets scared. He asks Edward Bennett Williams to talk to Reagan to cut him a deal on the $1 million. Edward Bennett Williams says, when the federal auditors asked to look at Jackson's books early in the Reagan administration, they found chaos. Jackson's organization, Push XL, see, you saw that other thing said Rainbow Coalition. When Push had to pay back the money, he left the leaned organization, L-I-E-N, lean, like lean on your debt. He left the organization that had a lien on it and went to Washington and set up another organization. When Push paid back the lien, he leaves Washington and sets up Push Rainbow Coalition. Check? Okay, because you got to watch him. He's a magician. But the white man is his Merlin. Jackson's organization, Push XL, was unable to account for $1 million of the money. The matter was referred to the Justice Department. Jackson came to Williams claiming that he was a victim of a vendetta by the Republicans. The case was dragging on, producing unflattering newspaper stories at a time when Jackson was trying to raise money for his 1988 presidential campaign. And Williams says that when he talked with the Reagan administration, he said quite the contrary. They were not only not trying to arrest Jackson, but had favorable viewpoints of him, so much so that they cut a deal to pay back $550,000 of the misappropriated money at $125,000 a year. And again, as I said earlier, that's when Jesse left Chicago, went to D.C. Just a case in point. The only point to that is no black man would ever be allowed to pay back a misappropriated grant when Abernathy's son just went down for $1,500. Now, I just want to keep that in line. Now, let's go back to something else very critical. Washington Post story. This story is dated July 12, 1999. And the story, which I've now collaborated from the declassified documents that I have, FBI examined private life of King's successor. It says that after King died, the FBI began to investigate Coretta Scott King, Ralph Abernathy, and Andy Young. They emphatically said, we cannot trust these three, and we must do everything we can. They dropped the investigation of Coretta. They then went on to do to Andy and to do to Ralph what they had done to Martin. That was on April 12th that they signed the memo. On April 12th, I'm going to show you Jesse Jackson announcing that every time there's a crucifixion, there's a resurrection. saying that he is the resurrected man. Okay, what's that other tape you got there, Mr. Brown? Let's put this one in. Okay, let's put that one in and take it backwards a little bit. There's no other tape that back there that you have? And that one is still rolling? Okay. Now, Jesse's a strong proponent of the no Raul theory. And again, I showed you when I was here last.
We were totally dependent on Dr.
Yeah, turn the lights down. Now run it backwards. Run it backwards. That's Jackie saying that when the assassination went down, Jesse called her. And Jesse said, Jackie, Martin's dead. You're going to hear about it, but Martin's dead. And Jackie, she says, well, what are we going to do now, Jesse? She didn't say, how's Coretta? She didn't say, how's everybody else? She didn't say, is anybody hurt? She said, Jesse, what are we going to do now? Something you want to tell me? Okay, gotcha. Okay, and in this picture, now, yeah, this is Jesse announcing he's available for leadership. But just keep going back, because I want to put this in context. Oh, there's the white man, Don Rose. He's very important, because Don Rose, the white man, just stop it. Freeze. Oh, right there. Hold him up against the wall. Don Rose, great. His name, you all don't know him. I'm from Chicago. Don Rose is the white man that you see when you black to get the white media to report on you. You don't go call NBC, you don't call CBS, you call Don Rose, and he gets the media. When I was attacked and fired out of the mayor's office in Chicago, it was Don Rose who coordinated the white media's attack on me, which came May 1st, the Illuminati birthday, 1988. Don Rose is the man that Jesse Jackson left town to meet up, who put him on the Today Show the next morning after Martin was killed to start the discussion that Jesse is the heir apparent to Martin King. And you'll hear him say, I told Jesse, and we reinforced each other, that Jesse was the likely choice. Well, excuse me, Mr. White Man. Are you in the SCLC? And doesn't it seem odd, Mr. White Man, that outside of the FBI, you're the only other white man that feels it's your job to pick the black man to run the black organization? See, it takes a lot of arrogance for me to stand here and say who's going to be head of the next ADL. Lieutenants of Satan. That would be like, well, you ain't even in the group. You can't even vote them in. But everybody don't know Don Rose. He's another one of those white people of the Jewish religion that got their fingerprints on the King assassination. And you don't know him. There used to be something in Chicago called Triple C. And Don Rose was the front man behind Al Raby, who was one of Martin King's associates, one of Harold Washington's associates, who died writing the resolution for the Black Jewish Coalition condemning Steve Coakley on November 25th, 1989. Al Raby dies laying on the resolution condemning me. Whatever that was struck his ass dead with a heart attack at 155 pounds, 5'9". Okay. Now let's keep going backwards. Let's just keep going backwards because I'm going to show you Jesse in the courtyard. Now remember we saw the people falsely pointing. For the record, in this picture is the man Raul, who's picked out of a lineup by a white woman named Grable, and Raul is standing next to Lee Harvey Oswald, who's standing next to Clay Shaw. Point being that the people who killed in the Kennedy came around for the king. Okay? Same squad. Notice Jesse, does he have a tie on? Now remember we heard, stop right there. That's Calvin Moore. Oh, stop right there. Look at Jesse, no tie on. That ain't important yet. That's Ben Branch. Jesse wouldn't wear a tie that night. The briefing to the military men is friendlies will not be wearing ties. Ralph had on a tie. Martin was made to put his tie on. But Jesse emphatically wasn't going to wear no tie. And when we look at the people in the courtyard, notice who ain't wearing ties and who is. If you get to King video number 1, you'll see the people without the ties ducking when the camera comes. For the things you're seeing us do now, that's in King assassination number 2 in the video. The only audio back there is a tape called King Assassination 99 or Jackson's role in the King assassination. They're both the same tape. Okay, keep going backwards a little bit. Now, Jackson's in the courtyard at that moment, but all the staff is at the hospital. Jackson told everybody, don't talk to the press. Soon as everybody left, he started talking to the press. Notice the shooting was in the light, and now everybody's gone, it's in the dark. Very important. Okay, let's hear Andy starting right here.
A jar, and started scraping up the blood, and said, you know, and crying. It was Martin's precious blood. This blood was shed for us. It was, you know, it was weird, but people freaked out and did strange things. Jesse put his hands in the blood and wiped it on the front of his shirt. So, and it was. I mean, what do you do?
You tell the truth.
In a moment like that.
Tell the truth.
Abernathy Young and others went to the hospital.
Notice nobody's giving a statement.
Where the media began to swarm.
Look at Jesse.
Yes, sir.
Did you hear what he said? Stop it a second. Jesse's saying in his southern accent, I need me a ride to go see Dr. King. Anybody got a ride I can go see Dr. King? Now the staff done left with the body. Ralph's in the ambulance with Martin. The rest of the staff's in the cars behind the ambulance. The police, who have cut off all of Memphis, are moving this procession, towards the hospital with a police escort, since all the roads are closed. Now, there's a tape back there. It might be one. I don't know if there is one. I don't think there is one, Coakley TV. But I did a cable show in Chicago laying out the King assassination and Jesse's role. And I said this for the record before. Jesse saw the program. And when Jesse, for him. Because as I mentioned, as Jesse would see me in the public, all my friends go, whoa, here come Jesse, whoa, Steve's here, it's gonna be fireworks. And then they watch Jesse run around me. And I'm saying, if I'm talking about him, just like if you was talking about me, I'll hunt your ass down. You would never see me run from somebody dogging me out. Especially if it's unrighteous. Jesse's asking for someone to take him to see Dr. King. Now, he could have rolled with the rest of the staff, but he didn't ride with the rest of the staff because it wasn't but two phones coming through the switchboard and out, and the one payphone. Jesse runs to the one payphone, calls his wife, then calls Coretta. So can't nobody get to the phone because Jesse on it. So the staff go, everybody says no talking to the press, they all leave. Jesse sees they all gone, knows he's looking around. Can I get a ride to see Dr. King? You know ain't nobody gonna take him but another staff member. After he says it long enough, ain't nobody to take him. The press says, come on, Jackson, talk to us. Go.
That's good. Would you tell me just what happened so we can get this film in, please?
Jesse always senses the moment. And it was an epical moment. And he was there.
The black people's leader, our Moses, the wonderful 400-500-year leader, has been taken from us by hatred and bitterness. Even as I stand at this hour, I cannot even allow hate to enter my heart at this time, for it was sickness, not meanness, that killed him.
Stop. Now let's take that comment. It was sickness, not meanness, that killed him. Versus Hosea saying, I was so mad I could take protons, neutrons, and kill me some white folk. But immediately, like Bevel, Jackson then forgave people he don't even know who they are. See, it's something you give an absolution and ain't even nobody in the confession box. You might as well forgive Casper the ghost. But he's already forgiven. Don't worry, don't mess with him, because it ain't nothing. It was meanness, hatred, or some old bullshit. You know what I mean? Okay, I'm sorry, but listen.
Father crying, hollering, oh God. And I immediately started running upstairs to where he was, and I caught his head, and I tried to feel his head, and I asked him, I said, Dr. King, do you
Stop. Jackson gets up there, now that everybody's gone, and begins to say, I was the last person to talk to Dr. King. And I held him in my arms, and I said, Dr. King, can you hear me? Dr. King, can you hear me? And he never touched him. He never touched him. See, he used that statement to say that's how he got the blood on his shirt. But Andy just told you how he got the blood on his shirt. What did he do? He did this. He did this. You catch that?
Yes, sir.
Jesus or Judas? Okay, so now Ralph Abernathy was the only person to hold Martin, just to be clear. And Ralph held him from the moment of the balcony till they put him on the stretcher. Ralph was the only one in the ambulance. Ralph was the only one in the operating room. Ralph was the only one at the autopsy. And you will cry when you hear Ralph Abernathy say, when they take that saw and cut open Martin King's brain, and he says, and I was looking there on that gurney at my buddy, and when they cut his head, I knew my buddy wasn't in that body anymore. And on that last speech, Martin King, before he makes that, I've been to the seen the glory to come in the Lord, he turns to Ralph Abernathy and he tells the audience, I want you to know something here tonight, that my best buddy in the whole wide world is Ralph Abernathy. And why did he have the need to tell everyone who he loved as his friend unless he felt someone trying to falsely plant themselves as that person? And again, since Jesse was 6 in the order, it was no way he was the heir apparent, and Martin had already carved out the structure of the organization. They all knew it was Ralph after Martin. Al Sampson could come up here and tell you how many times Martin ingrained. No, don't do it. Let's go here, because we're running out of time, and I'd rather have you see this than hear me.
To hold his head. By that time, Dr. While the rest of King's aides huddled through the night at the motel, Jackson rushed back to Chicago, where rage was already sweeping the city.
Stop. The cable show I do in Chicago. I'm straight up down, seeing all over Chicago. Jesse watches the show. But in the show, I mentioned Al Sharpton inspired me. Jackson calls Sharpton and accuses him of inspiring me to attack Jackson. Sharpton says, well, what did Coakley say? And Jesse gave him every detail. Sharpton said, and I wrote it down. He said, and then I went to see Reverend Claude I'm going to say Claude Wyatt. He said, I went to see Wyatt T. Walker, who was SCLC's field director at that time. And when he told Wyatt T. Walker what I said, Wyatt T. Walker said, protect Coakley. Don't let nobody mess with him. And tell Coakley that if Jackson ever attacks him or harasses him about that analysis, just ask Jesse to tell Coakley how he got out of Memphis on the night of the assassination, since the planes, the boats, the trains, the buses, and the cars were all cut off. When I mentioned that to Dick Gregory right before he came here a couple of weeks ago, Dick said, well, you know what happened, don't you? The FBI called the airport and let one plane out. One plane that had one Negro man on it, who got away from the other saying he was sick. Jesse says, well, you know, when they had the investigation, they never talked to me. Nigga, you left. You wasn't there. And that's when Don Rose says, and Jesse and I began to plan his resurrection. Then you're going to see Jesse at April 12th say, I'm ready for leadership now. And only 4 days after that, the FBI set up the plan to attack Ralph Abernathy and Andy Young and Coretta Scott King, with no plan whatsoever to attack Jackson, who's far faster, whose future was far higher than those donkeys and those mules, that thoroughbred would have been the one to stop unless he was yours. Okay, let's go.
When we were going to get in the car, it was really a silence, you know. It was who's going to speak first, you know, because I didn't have the words to say, and he didn't know what to say. And when he came home, he got in the bed with his shoes on and the shirt. And he just laid in the bed.
And I think that in public, Jackson had an altogether different demeanor. It was as if he could see his destiny opening up before him at last, and he rushed toward it. 14 hours after the shooting, he appeared on the Today Show. Later that day, while listening to the solemn tributes at the Chicago City Council's memorial service, Jackson tapped Mayor Daley on the shoulder and asked to speak. Pointing to his shirt, Jackson said, "This blood is on the chest and hands of those who would not have welcomed the king here yesterday." Then he called for calm in the city and end to the rioting. Meanwhile, at Jackson's directive, a movement publicist was booking interviews on Chicago TV shows. They were falling all over themselves to get Jesse, and particularly as the word got out later that morning that Jesse had returned to Chicago and was wearing clothes stained with Dr. King's blood and was appearing before the city council and so forth. Don Rose accompanied Jackson to the tapings, the two men riding from studio to studio in the back seat of a car. He was thinking very clearly, thinking ahead, thinking of, frankly, his own career, the future of the movement, and his role within it. And we were both reinforcing each other with the view that Jesse was a very logical successor to Dr. King.
But when I see you here so much alive, asking what to do, where to turn, I am available now. I am more convinced than ever that every time that there is a crucifixion in right and righteousness, that inevitably and universally there is a resurrection. That is the
King aides, long resentful of Jackson, saw his behavior as brazen opportunism. They were already angry that he had spoken to the press in the hours after the assassination, and furious that he had so dramatically inflated his own part in the story of King's final moments.
A lot of those resentments that had been buried in the movement and that allowed us to work alongside each other, but never got expressed in the emotion and frustration of Martin's assassination.
Now watch Jesse walking in front of her. Jesse's walking in front of her at her own funeral. Look at him walking in front of her, and watch him turn around and look at her, and she turns her head.
As their story went, King had
Watch this.
Jackson, told him to go do his own thing.
Look, she sees him looking, turns her head. He turns back, she turns back. That'll be in the tape. You can slow it down and look at it. Cut.
He remembers King.
Stop. Now watch this. Watch this. This is Pepper's book. Let's turn the lights on real quick. Now, we're running down on time. I got to talk real fast. Page 246 of Pepper's book. In 1968, Ernestine Campbell and her husband owned the Trumpet Hotel, which abutted the Lorraine. No one has ever talked to her or asked her about what she saw on the fateful afternoon. Ernestine says she left the hotel and started home just before 6 p.m. Driving her gold bronze Cadillac up Butler and turning right on Mulberry, as she passed the Lorraine driveway on Butler, she saw Dr. King standing on the balcony. She didn't hear anything because she had the car windows up and the radio was on. As she turned the corner onto Mulberry, she looked up and saw Dr. King lying on the balcony. She thought he had had a heart attack. She stopped for a minute, wondering why people weren't running up to the balcony. Her attention was in particularly drawn to Jesse Jackson, whom she said had one foot on the first step of the stairway, looking up to the balcony while bent over, putting something into a suit bag. Then Don Rose, the white man that you just saw, when I started following that theme, I then found in the book Jesse by Michael Frady, Don Rose, the white boy you just saw, he said, Rose arranged appearances on 2 or 3 local programs, and the next day, the 2 of them rode from station to station, sitting in the back seat of this car they had available to him with the driver. Jackson was attired in a dashiki, recalls Rose, although his blood-smeared sweater, quote, I think he also had it with him. He had some kind of tote bag, and he just wouldn't let it go. Now, he's noticing Jesse's up in Chicago, and he's got a bag, and he won't let it go. And we got the woman, oh, that's a funny way to put it, huh? Says, if you want to sell tapes, you better stop now. Huh? I understand. Russ said he didn't do it. But see, I just killed you. Who gave you that note? Okay. Let me just end this with showing, and I guess you all saw it. I don't need to show you the Kyle's thing. Y'all saw that. I would have put that in the record on the tape, but you all got that on the record in the tape. Again, if I was to show you these house assassination documents, and you were to look at the line of questioning, here's from one of the FBI documents. Ralph Abernathy and Andy Young also became bureau targets. Shortly after the assassination, the field instructed to report any information of possible immoral activities of King's 2 associates. Well, Jackson was ready for leadership. Why were you chasing Abernathy and Young? If Jackson is the one announcing he's ready to go. May 24th, 1968, New York Times. They tout him as the next great black leader for all of America. And as Barbara Reynolds made a note, that then led the way for over 1,115 articles touting Jesse Jackson as the next leader for black America. Now again, never in the history of the white man have they ever treated a black man with such exalting nature. Never. There's never been such a person. And last thing in closing, on the question of Proctor and not Pierce, and I'm closing it out. When Jesse was made ambassador to the Africa, he is the ambassador to Africa, all of Africa. Jesse Jackson is the ambassador to all of Africa for democracy. In any case, Jackson also closely tutored in the elements of King's vision by several North Carolina A&T professors, especially by A&T president Samuel Proctor, who had been a fellow student of King's at Boston University and remained a counselor to him, a stocky man with a large, calm, heavy face who became something like Jesse's spiritual Merlin during those Greensboro days. He kept throwing King up to me, says Jackson, how King was able to do what he was doing, and he taught me how to be like that. Proctor remembers that, quote, Jesse was very moved by the image of Martin Luther King, and it was not long before he entered into what would prove to be a central fixation of his life, to be like Martin King. But please, Jesse, you didn't have to kill him.
It was much deeper than a simple root.
You didn't have to kill him to make it so. All right.
In the sense that he never talked to anybody like that. And
Brothers and sisters, please
what happened was,
give it up for Brother Steve Coakley. Once again, give it up for Brother Steve Coakley for bringing it straight, bringing it to us, telling us what time it is. You're hearing it clearly, the real deal. We're clearing up our own evidence. We need everybody to hold hands, brothers and sisters. We're going to do our African affirmation.
James Earl Ray claims he did not kill Martin Luther King Jr. And more people believe him, even Dr. King's children.
I believe this man is innocent.
His widow.
This is a cause we have to fight for.
You think he is innocent? And a former UN ambassador.
Yeah, I do.
Some question the investigation.
The official story says those of us who were there, that we didn't see what we saw.
And who do the Kings hold responsible for his assassination?
Army intelligence, CIA, FBI.
Tonight, the controversial theory of a government conspiracy.
But we have a power.
And that's why the decision was taken to kill him.
Do you believe that Lyndon Johnson was part of the plot to kill your father?
I do.
You're an investigator. Here are two of the men that you accuse.
And the confrontation that puts explosive allegations to the test. ABC News, Saturday night. Who shot Martin Luther King Jr.?
The Lorraine Motel in Memphis, now a museum in honor of the greatest civil rights leader of our time. It was here on April 4th, 1968, that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. He was only 39 years old. An escaped convict named James Earl Ray was quickly convicted, but the questions have never gone away. Were others involved? Was Ray, as he claimed, the patsy in some darker conspiracy? Good evening, I'm Forrest Sawyer. All these years, the King family have kept their silence. No longer. Now, with James Earl Ray near death, they are stepping into the glaring spotlight of controversy. What they believe and what they are willing to fight for will surprise you. Even more surprising are the twists and turns in one of the most amazing conspiracy stories you will ever hear. They are speaking out now for a new cause. Martin Luther King Jr.'s widow, Coretta, and their 4 children, breaking a silence they have kept for nearly 30 years.
I wanted to let it go. I wanted to, but I thought it would eventually come around and I'd have to face it. And
they say they want the justice Dr. King never received, and they want to know who really killed him. Of one thing they are certain: it was not the man convicted of the assassination. Everybody is united in the belief that James Earl Ray not only did not pull the trigger, he didn't know there was going to be a murder that day. Everybody.
Absolutely.
The evidence I've seen and heard will vindicate or exonerate James Earl Ray, and also it will point the finger at who actually was behind the assassination.
This man has sat there 29 years, and he had almost basically nothing to do with this assassination.
There is new scientific evidence that may be capable of establishing that the petitioner is actually innocent. Is that
this winter, James Earl Ray's attorneys summoned the Kings as witnesses to support new motions to reopen Ray's case. And the family helped push for new tests on the rifle found at the scene, never conclusively matched to the bullet that killed Dr. King.
Petitioner also intends to call members of the King family.
The King's support of James Earl Ray has not come without criticism. King biographer David Garrow.
I think the King family has been the victim of very bad advice and counsel. What we have here is a situation that is sad and disappointing. James Earl Ray's guilt is proven.
We called for the trial that never happened.
It was Ray's attorney, William Pepper, who persuaded the Kings to step forward now.
It would be a tragic irony, therefore, if the man accused of assassinating my husband is denied his day in court.
I think the government wants this covered up. And I think they would be very happy if James Earl Ray died, because then there'd be no petitioner, and this whole matter would then go away.
The matter the government wants to go away, says Pepper, is state-sanctioned murder. You are convinced that Lyndon Johnson knew about the assassination plot against King?
I'm convinced that he knew about it.
This startling theory comes from someone who, as a young man in 1967, knew and admired Martin Luther King.
Well, first, I didn't kill Dr. King.
Today, William Pepper is tireless in an 11th-hour crusade to clear the name of King's convicted killer, now terminally ill. His efforts have brought others forward, too.
I think there are questions that now make me think that the country needs to open this up.
Former United Nations Ambassador Andrew Young, one of Dr. King's closest aides. James Earl Ray, in your heart of hearts at this moment, you think he is innocent?
Yeah, I do. Only because, you know, he's such a tragic, pitiful man. He couldn't have done all of these things by himself.
It was on April 3rd, 1968, that Martin Luther King Jr. arrived in Memphis, Tennessee, and spoke that night at the Masonic Temple.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop.
We were crying and didn't even know we were crying. I was crying, preachers were crying, people in the audience were crying.
Memphis minister Billy Kiles remembers a sermon eerie with premonitions.
And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you.
On the day of his death, King and his aides gathered at the Lorraine Motel. Dozens of Memphis police officers patrolled the surrounding streets. And as they had for years, FBI agents had Dr. King under tight surveillance. But at the motel that morning, the civil rights leaders seemed at ease.
I see Dr. King come from the restaurant, which was down a little alley.
Former New York Times reporter Earl Caldwell was also staying at the motel.
And he walks up onto the balcony and crosses the balcony and goes to his room. By himself. He didn't have a security with him, nobody. If anybody wanted to do him harm, he was right there.
That same day, a man using an alias checked into a small rooming house directly across from the motel. The common bathroom near his room had a clear view of King's balcony. That man was James Earl Ray, at the time an escaped convict who had been serving time for robbing a grocery store, and who, records prove, bought a rifle fitted with a sniper scope just 6 days before.
I heard a rifle shot, and I ran to the door.
Reporter Earl Caldwell's room was underneath and to one side of Dr. King's.
And I was very embarrassed to find that it wasn't a rifle shot. It was a Coca-Cola bottle that the housekeeper had dropped off her tray, and it had broken on the concrete walkway outside my door.
It was one of those cool spring evenings.
Just arrived to pick up Dr. King for dinner, Billy Kiles.
He asked me to pick out a tie, a couple ties. I said, this one's better. It was black and orange or something.
6 p.m. Down by the car, Andrew Young, Jesse Jackson, an aide named James Orange, and Dr. King's driver were waiting.
James Orange and I were behind the limousine, shadowboxing, and sort of clowning, and just having a good time and feeling good.
I said, guys, let's go. I got 5 or 6 steps.
Last words, do I really need a coat? And then the shot rang out.
Pow-yow.
This explosion, which I took to be a bomb. I thought, Jesus, someone's bombed a motel.
I looked back, and Martin was lying on the balcony. I think one of his shoes had come off. His foot was on the railing. There was a crushed cigarette in his hand.
His pulse was still, you could still feel his pulse, and he was still breathing.
The tie that I had picked out had been severed, and the knot was upside down. There was a gaping hole in his face. And all this seems impossible. It just didn't seem, it was like a dream.
An ambulance rushed Dr. King to St. Joseph's Hospital. Just outside, King's aide, Jesse Jackson.
All I know is that police were all around. You had literally 100 to 150 police in the area. And they didn't see anybody.
I was in my bedroom, and the phone rang. And the first call I got was from Jesse Jackson. He says, Dr. King was shot.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, 39
I came in the room as she had turned on the television set, and I heard the announcement. And I remember I went in my room and I prayed, and I said, please don't let my daddy die.
The sniper's bullet cut down Dr. King as he...
Very shortly, Andy Young called. He either said he's not dead or he's still living. Well, I knew then when he said it like that.
We're going to go to Memphis now.
Martin Luther King Jr. was pronounced dead at 11 minutes past 7 o'clock.
Police came in and conducted a very quick investigation. And
that night, ABC News reporter Tom Jarrell was in Memphis.
The shot apparently came from an apartment building directly across the street.
From the police and from witnesses near the rooming house, a theory of what had happened was already getting out.
The police here in Memphis immediately issued a bulletin for a young white man dressed in dark clothes who dashed out of that building across the street. He dropped a rifle, which was fitted with a scope, on the sidewalk, and then he fled.
The official story about a lone assassin quickly emerged, and as Memphis police swarmed the crime scene that night, the FBI launched the largest manhunt in Bureau history. But some claim the investigation was far from thorough.
Nobody did that most basic thing, which is go door to door at the crime scene and where were you standing, what did you see? The official story says that those of us who were there, that we didn't see what we saw.
When we come back, a surprising account from eyewitnesses at the scene.
Who shot Martin Luther King Jr.? ABC News Saturday Night will continue. ABC News Saturday Night. Who shot Martin Luther King Jr. continues. The official story that the shot which killed Martin Luther King came from the rooming house is at odds with what some eyewitnesses nearest to Dr. King saw, including former New York Times reporter Earl Caldwell.
I'm in the doorway, then I see this figure directly at eye length coming out of a crouched position in this bushes. When you look directly across from my doorway, you were looking at thicket.
Dr. King's driver, Solomon Jones, later told Caldwell and another reporter he too saw someone in the bushes.
He said he saw this figure from the bushes, but he actually saw even the puff of smoke from the shot being fired from there. I quoted him in my story that was in the New York Times the next day.
The two reporters interviewed others who also said they saw something.
How many people saw somebody in the bushes?
At least a half a dozen.
And some of them say they saw a rifle?
Yes.
And do you believe that's where the shot came from?
Absolutely.
A photographer on the scene documented the next few critical minutes.
The police were coming at that time with drawn guns, asking where the shot come from, and the people you see pointing were saying it came from there.
Someone firing from the bushes would have had a similar view of his target as someone firing from the rooming house.
I started pointing to the rooming house. That's the only place that it looked like it could have come from.
Not that you heard the shot from there?
No, I didn't know where the shot came from. Now, it could have also come from the bushes.
But strangely, the next morning, the bushes were all cut down.
Somebody gave an order in the middle of the night to go out and cut down that underbrush, so that when the sun came up on the 5th of April, the bushes were no longer there.
To Young, it smacks of cover-up. But the Memphis police say they cut the brush away to help, not hurt the investigation. Still, the motel area was not properly sealed off to protect evidence, and at least some key witnesses were never interviewed.
No Memphis police officer, no FBI agent, no one investigating the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. ever came to me and asked me even one question, ever.
Have you ever asked why?
Well, I do now.
The casket being taken from the front of the church now by the pallbearers.
Through the two simple maple doors of the Ebenezer Church.
As the nation mourned the fallen civil rights leader, the search for the killer intensified. Within 72 hours, the rifle found near the rooming house was traced to a store in Birmingham, Alabama. And within 2 weeks, the only fingerprints on the rifle were identified as James Earl Ray's. By this time, Ray had made it to Canada, obtained a false passport, and traveled on to London, Portugal, and back to London.
James Earl Ray, or Raymond George Snade,
where he was caught 2 months after he fled.
And Ray would then be returned to face trial for the Memphis slaying of Dr. Martin Luther King.
In March 1969, Ray pleaded guilty before a jury to the murder of Dr. King. He signed a detailed confession, waiving his rights to a formal trial or appeal, and he avoided the death penalty. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison, and then just 3 days later, Ray recanted everything and has claimed his innocence ever since.
I spent $2.5 million of your money in 2 years looking into James Earl Ray, the validity of the guilty plea. He did it, period.
Judge Bryant is waiting for Mr. Blakey and myself.
In 1977, Chief Counsel Robert Blakey led a House Select Committee investigation of Dr. King's murder, chaired by Cleveland Congressman Louis Stokes.
Mr. Ray, would you care to clarify that?
The star witness, James Earl Ray.
I was associated with a man named Raul.
Ray insisted he was a fall guy for King's murder, set up in a conspiracy he knew nothing about by a shadowy figure, Raul, who was using Ray to buy guns.
You didn't return to Atlanta.
At one point, the committee asked Ray if he had been in Atlanta the same time as Dr. King, possibly stalking the civil rights leader.
I know I didn't return to Atlanta, and if I did, well, I'll just take responsibility for the King case here on TV.
The next thing that happened is Mr. Stokes, our chairman, had a researcher bring out a large blow-up of the laundry slip that proves he was in Atlanta on that day.
This is some type of forged document, because I know I did not take the laundry in April 1st.
He lied and lied repeatedly about his movements.
The committee hearings concluded there was ample evidence that James Earl Ray was the killer, but they also believed he had not acted alone.
We found in St. Louis that an offer was made on Dr. King's life by a group of racist businessmen, a $50,000 bounty. And what we tried to do was connect that bounty offer to Ray and or Ray's family, and we were able to do it at least circumstantially.
Now, 20 years after those hearings, William Pepper is convinced the committee was wrong and that Ray is innocent.
It took me 10 years from the time I first saw him to become totally convinced of that. I'd like you to meet Dexter King.
This spring, Attorney Pepper spent hours briefing Dexter King on his theory.
Thank you for letting me come and impose on your time.
You appreciate it.
Then brought him to meet his client.
I just want to ask you, for the record, did you kill my father?
No, I didn't, no. But sometimes these questions are difficult to answer.
I believe, and my family believes, that this man is innocent.
After the historic meeting, Dexter King talked to the press.
There's something about looking another person in the eyes and asking them a question, spiritually speaking, that you yourself can then say, yes, I personally feel this now. I think truth...
So then, who does the King family blame for Dr. King's death?
I am told that it was part and parcel Army intelligence, CIA, FBI.
This is a staggering idea to carry around.
Yes.
I think we knew it all along. That's why we're not, like, jumping out of our seats, because we've known for years.
What's more, Dexter King now believes the plot went all the way to the White House. Do you believe that Lyndon Johnson was part of the plot to kill your father?
I do.
Why?
Well, based on the evidence that I've been shown, I would think that it would be very difficult for something of that magnitude to occur on his watch and he not be privy to it.
When we come back, why the King family believes the U.S. government was behind the assassination plot.
Luther King Jr. continues. Once again, Forrest Sawyer.
Martin Luther King devoted much of his life to helping the poor. That's why he was here in Memphis. So it might surprise you to know that his family believes the government was behind his death. Not so surprising when you realize that top officials, including the powerful director of the FBI, really were out to stop him and his movement.
We have a power that can't be found in Molotov cocktails, but we do have a power.
From the beginning, despite Martin Luther King Jr.'s commitment to nonviolence, the FBI saw him as a troublemaker.
We have the right to walk to Montgomery.
From Montgomery, Alabama, to Selma,
We ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
to Birmingham.
I'm tired of hate. I'm tired of selfishness.
FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover became convinced King was a threat to civil order, and Hoover believed a possible communist.
I'm not gonna use violence, no matter who says.
The FBI electronically was all over Dr. King.
King historian David Garrow.
Dr. King's home telephone was wiretapped. His office telephone was wiretapped. When one now can look at the transcripts, it's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pages.
Wherever Dr. King went, everybody was watching.
Christopher Pyle, a former military intelligence officer who exposed the government's illegal domestic spy program, says FBI Director Hoover was out to get King.
We discovered in the FBI's files a copy of a memo which had been sent to Dr. King suggesting that Dr. King commit suicide before the source of the memo revealed certain tape recordings to Mrs. King.
Did it frighten him?
No, it didn't, but it convinced him that they were serious about trying to destroy him.
It was not an empty threat. On November 21st, 1965, the FBI sent an anonymous package to King's Atlanta headquarters with tape recordings, allegedly of King engaging in extramarital sex. Did you know right away that it was from the FBI?
Sure. It really was tragic that anybody in official circles would sink to such depths.
Well, I listened to the tape and I didn't find anything on there that, you know, that appeared to be anything like that.
Today, Coretta Scott King is speaking for the first time about the sexual allegations the FBI was using to try and destroy her husband.
I feel so strongly because Martin and I never had one argument about a woman. Not one.
What is the truth?
As far as I'm concerned, I don't know of any relationship that my husband had. Not saying that there weren't some, because nobody's a saint, but I don't know of any. Martin was not a promiscuous man. He was not that kind of a man.
Martin Luther King was the kind of man who managed to keep his family sealed away from the dangers he faced.
We felt so safe and so protected and very secure.
And I would run up into his arms, and each one of us had a kissing spot. And he'd say, okay, we're going to play the kissing game today.
And he'd say, where's Mommy Sugar? Where is Bunny Sugar? Where is Yoki Sugar? And then he'd put up on top of the refrigerator.
Do you remember that?
And he said, jump. And she would jump into his arms.
I was so jealous when she could jump and I couldn't.
Those peaceful family times were few and far between, as Dr. King now challenged the military establishment itself, vowing to help stop the Vietnam War.
It's an evil war. No matter where it leads, no matter what abuses it may bring, I'm going to tell the truth. We've burned down too many rice fields. We've run too many peasants and humble people out of their villages and out of their little huts. It's time, America, to come on home from Vietnam.
It scared the Army that a man had that much strength in the United States could influence a war that they were losing.
In 1993, then reporter Steve Tompkins wrote a series of articles for the Memphis Commercial Appeal, claiming that Army intelligence officers were certain King was leading a revolution.
And they felt that if Dr. King was turning against the war, and Dr. King was saying, I'm going to shut down the government to stop this war, Dr. King then was becoming an enemy.
And when King announced plans to lead hundreds of thousands in a Poor People's March on Washington, James Earl Ray's attorney William Pepper says government leaders became even more alarmed.
And when they viewed the Pentagon demonstration in October of '67, they got what they thought was a taste of barbarians at the gate.
William Pepper's controversial theory, now embraced by the King family, is that the government's fear of Dr. King was behind the plot to kill him.
So he was never going to be allowed to bring that mass of humanity to Washington. That, I believe, was the primary reason why he was killed.
Pepper bases much of his theory on Stephen Tompkins' unnamed Army sources, who he claims followed King's every move.
They told me that the Army would never have let Dr. King get to Washington. And they said, well, let's just say we would have stopped him somehow.
Tompkins says the Army was terrified there might be more of the rioting that had swept America's inner cities the previous summer. Newark, New Jersey. 23 people killed in sniper fire Detroit. Week-long rioting, the worst this century. 43 dead.
They'd seen what happened in Detroit. They saw what happened in Newark. We've got black Americans shooting at our soldiers. Something is terribly wrong here, and the United States is in danger.
You see, the real problem with violence is that we have never been violent. We have been too nonviolent.
And the government worried that King could no longer control the young black militants also planning to come to Washington.
There is no reason for us to believe that the same destructive rioting and violence cannot, or that it will not, happen here in Washington if King attempts his so-called Poor People's March.
It's one thing to bring in a group of political demonstrators who work together and who've had training in civil disobedience. It's another to assemble a lot of poor folks from the ghettos of America and the slums of America, assisted by street gangs from Chicago for security, and bring them into the nation's capital.
And as we know now, they were saying that we must never allow another leader such as Dr. King to rise in black America. So there were great forces. But we were really at a turning point in America then.
He would say to his staff, I don't expect to survive this revolution. Our society is too sick.
King always knew he was vulnerable to those who saw him as a threat, like the racists who taunted him in Chicago.
I think it's one of the most tragic pictures of man's humanity to man that I've ever seen. I've been in Mississippi and Alabama.
John F. Kennedy died. We were sitting together, and he said, that's exactly what's going to happen to me.
But Dr. King never let his fear of death stop him.
We are more determined than ever before to go to Washington and Memphis.
Before the Poor People's Campaign, there was to be a brief side trip to Memphis, where William Pepper claims the government decided to strike.
We feel that this is something we have to do.
Dr. King arrived in Memphis the night before he was killed.
And he called me, and he said, it's storming here, and I don't feel too good. But they just called and said that I need to come over to speak. I guess I'll go on over there. I'll call you tomorrow night. And that was the last conversation I had.
And it was the last sermon Dr. King would ever preach. Mason's Temple, April 3rd, 1968.
Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights.
That same evening, James Earl Ray's attorney, William Pepper, claims that the government assassination plot was in motion, with Ray set up to take the fall.
I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
The next night, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed by a single rifle shot here in front of his room at the Lorraine Motel. But did it happen the way William Pepper claims? When we come back, a key figure steps forward with explosive information.
Dr. King Jr. continues. Once again, Forrest Sawyer.
James Earl Ray's attorney, William Pepper, laid out his conspiracy theory in a book he published 2 years ago. Here's how he sees it. In the bushes just over there, a contract killer hired by the mafia, connected to the government. On a nearby water tower and a rooftop, teams of military snipers serving as backup shooters. And all around King, working undercover, informants, a possible CIA agent, the Memphis police, the FBI, Army intelligence, some or all of them in on the plot.
In your mind, is it possible at all that as you look at this grand conspiracy, you might be wrong?
You know, I really wish that were the case, Forrest. I have to say, I'm learning more and more that confirms the accuracy of the involvement of the government.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes, beyond, at this point in time, beyond a reasonable doubt.
It's a very serious allegation that the U.S. Army would murder an American citizen. It's a libel on the U.S. Army until such time as they can come forward with documented proof.
You have talked to only one person who has direct knowledge.
Yes, that's right.
Less than 15.
William Pepper says his source, he refuses to reveal his name, is a former member of a top-secret Army intelligence unit.
Did he show you documentation?
He didn't show me documentation. He provided the names of the team.
That means you have not seen any documentation that verifies what you've said.
That means I have seen only a cablegram, a military cablegram, which has certain elements of the information in it.
This cablegram, to be precise, which Pepper claims orders the snipers to Memphis. It looks impressive, but the military experts consulted by ABC News all say it is nonsense. Former Army intelligence officer Christopher Pyle.
The so-called orders that he reproduces in his book, which are not orders for an assassination operation at all, you don't know what they are, which look dubious on their face, like they were manufactured.
All of these people say this is an incomprehensible and fraudulent document.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't expect them to say anything else.
They're all covering up?
If it's a closely held military secret, as the presence of this team in Memphis was, I would expect them to cover it up.
According to Pepper, the secret sniper team was briefed at 4:30 a.m. on the day King was killed.
Pictures of Martin Luther King and Andrew Young were shown, but they were not to fire unless they had the orders.
Pepper says those orders would have come from a Green Beret of Alabama's 20th Special Forces Group named Billy Edson, who Pepper claims was the commander of the sniper team.
He conducted the briefing, from what I understand.
Pepper says the orders to shoot never came because the contract killer in the bushes hit his target. And Pepper believes that Edson's snipers would have pulled the trigger.
That team, and indeed most of the military establishment at that time, regarded Martin King as an enemy of the state.
Billy Edson thought Martin Luther King was a traitor to his country?
I believe he probably did.
About a 20-minute...
How does Pepper know all this? From anonymous sources he won't reveal. The most important ones he's never even spoken to.
I talked to 2 of the 8 members there that day I managed to find. One lives down in Latin America, the other one is in Canada.
Steve Tompkins, the former reporter who wrote articles on the military spy program, tracked down some of his own anonymous sources for Attorney Pepper.
You went back again at Bill Pepper's behest?
Right. Bill asked me to take a series of questions down to Warren. The Warren is the sniper that I went to see.
Warren and Murphy are false names for 2 of Tompkins' anonymous sources from the Green Beret sniper team allegedly in Memphis that day. Tompkins passed on to Pepper what he says they told him.
Mr. Pepper, you never even met Warren and Murphy. You've never spoken to them.
That's right.
Isn't it possible that they're just a couple of wackos making up stories?
I don't think so. Because Steve Tompkins believed them.
But you're way out there on a limb all by yourself based on what some other guy says?
I happen to believe what Steve Tompkins was telling me.
But there's a big problem. Steve Tompkins, the only one who has actually talked to the alleged sniper team, says Pepper has gotten it wrong.
Does the information that you have gathered,
and
which Bill Pepper has used extensively, lead to the conclusion that the government was involved in an assassination plot?
If you're asking me, do I believe that the United States government was going to murder Martin Luther King, my answer to that is no. I don't believe that.
Steve Tompkins today says he does not believe that the military was involved in any murder plot of Dr. King. Period, full stop.
Oh, I find that very interesting. Because he was the one that carried information back to me with respect to the assassination.
Pepper even has a signed affidavit from Tompkins.
He says, I have read the material in Dr. Pepper's book about these interviews conducted by me in which he refers to these soldiers who now live outside the United States as Warren and Murphy, and confirm its accuracy.
Today, Tompkins says he didn't read Pepper's affidavit closely enough before he signed it, and he insists the snipers were in Memphis to target black leaders only if they were leading a riot.
Their orders were watch, see what Dr. King is doing, you know, slip in quietly and slip out quietly if nothing happens.
That's a long way from an assassination plot.
That's a long way from an assassination plot.
Steve Tompkins does not say I'm wrong. He will tell you this day that what is wrong is the fact that they were there in case of a riot.
You don't see that as a big difference?
I see that as a nuance. Whether you kill under guise of a riot or you kill in planned fashion is very little different, actually.
During my tour of duty with the 20th Special Forces Group, in this period of time, this never happened.
Not possible.
It's impossible.
In April 1968, Colonel Lee Mize was senior military advisor to the 20th Special Forces Group. He is a recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he and others in the Special Forces are angry.
I've been off to war 5 different times for this country. I'd go tomorrow with these kind of people. And they've been given a black eye. And I don't like it.
General Henry Cobb was commander of the 20th Special Forces Group in 1968.
Were you aware of any of your men being deployed to Memphis?
No, sir. They could not have been without my knowledge. No way.
Here's the 20th. Here is their roster.
These men offer documentation they say proves no Green Beret from their group was in Memphis that day, and that Pepper's conspiracy is a lie.
Did you talk to anyone in the 20th Special Forces Group?
No.
Don't you think it would have been fair to contact the 20th Special Forces Group before you accused them of being involved in a murder plot?
If I had done that, all kinds of doors would have probably been closed to me, shutters would have come down.
Pepper claims the doors shut even earlier, when some from the sniper team were killed off to silence them, including the man Pepper said led the snipers, Billy Edson.
I believe Edson, one of them was killed in New Orleans. I don't know which one it was.
Did you see his death certificate?
No.
May I play something for you?
Sure.
May I ask your name, sir?
Billy Ray Edson.
What were you doing in 1968?
In his book, Pepper said this man had been killed to cover up the assassination plot.
Are you the Billy Edson that Mr. Pepper refers to?
Yes, I was, because he even put my Army serial number in it.
Did you have anything to do with the events that he describes?
No, sir, none whatsoever.
Anything you want to say to Mr. Pepper about this?
Yes, sir, I'd like to ask him some questions about where he got my name, or who gave him my name, or who sold him this story. Somebody's telling some lies.
That's Billy Edson.
That is a Billy Edson.
No, sir, that's Billy Edson.
That
is
is
a major in the 20th Special Forces Group in Alabama, not a captain. He's alive. He lives in Costa Rica.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what you say, and that's what he says.
I'm sure you believe that a man should be able to face his accuser. Would you like to meet Mr. Edson and Colonel Cobb?
Well, do you think it'll serve any purpose?
They feel that you falsely accused them of murder. They feel slandered, and they'd like to tell you that.
Fine, I'll be glad to talk to them. Will they answer? Will they answer?
Certainly.
Some questions?
I bet they'll answer anything you ask. Mr. Pepper, this is Billy Edson. This is Henry Cobb.
Mr. Edson, how do you do?
I don't want to shake your hand. I just want to look at you.
Do you want to sit down and talk?
Yeah.
Okay. General?
Henry Cobb.
General, how do you do?
We'll just move some chairs in here, gentlemen.
This man's name never would have come up if I had known he was alive.
But thinking he was dead, you were willing to mention his name.
There still would have to be enough evidence for him to be considered as being a part of that operation.
Do you have enough evidence?
Well, until I see the colonel here alive, which shakes the whole underpinning, because these other fellas fled supposedly because you were killed.
I want you to write something withdrawing everything you've read about any of us that you put in that book?
If you'll allow me, I want to go back and I want to find out why the information provided about you, in your instance, is untrue.
Do you acknowledge that maybe you got it wrong?
Of course I acknowledge that maybe I was provided with wrong information. And I've said that to the Colonel, and I'm going to go back and try to get to the bottom of it.
When we come back, what has happened since our broadcast first aired? William Pepper is still promoting his conspiracy theory that the government was behind the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. But in a new edition of his book published this year, Pepper has deleted any reference to Billy Ray Edson.
For his part, Edson is suing Pepper for $15 million. But Dexter King's belief in Pepper is unshaken. He even wrote the foreword for the new edition of Pepper's book, calling it the most plausible explanation for his father's murder. And what about last year's ballistics tests on the rifle found at the scene? The results were inconclusive. So the debate regarding James Earl Ray continues, and so do the theories surrounding the assassination. One man near the scene on the day of the shooting, Lloyd Jowers, has told ABC's Sam Donaldson he knows something about a contract killer allegedly in the bushes. But Jowers will say more only if granted immunity from prosecution. And that's something authorities won't do because they don't consider Jowers a credible witness. Ironically, immunity is precisely what the King family is proposing.
And I personally would like to see all the people who have information be given amnesty so that they can tell what they know.
The idea is not to punish anybody, but the idea is to purge the soul of America of this terrible sin.
And finally, James Earl Ray, the man imprisoned for nearly 30 years for the murder of Martin Luther King, is now seriously ill with liver disease. His lawyer, William Pepper, said this week that his client is too sick to seek a new trial, and that when Ray dies, there will be no further appeals.